right, so Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
It's a city that, always seems to be right at the heart of things, doesn't it? And, well, this weekend was no exception.
Definitely not.
We saw some pretty intense clashes playing out on the streets, and it really makes you think, what is it about Berlin with its past, its present, that makes it such a flashpoint for these kinds of ideological showdowns? So that's what we're going to be diving into today, folks. A deep dive, you could say.
Okay.
We're going to unpack not just what happened on the ground, the marches, the protests, all of that, but also the kind of the deeper currents, the historical echoes that make Berlin such a charged landscape.
Right. It's never simple, is it?
Absolutely not. And that's why, thankfully, I've got an expert with me today who can help us make sense of it all. So let's jump right in, shall we? Over the weekend, we saw a neo-Nazi march right through the heart of Berlin, in the Mitte district, no less.
A place steeped in history. Every corner has a story.
Exactly. And we're talking about a relatively small group, about 100 neo-Nazis. But they sparked a huge counter-protest, didn't they? Over 1,000 people turned out to oppose them. That's more than a 10-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about numbers, was it? I mean, these counter-protesters were... They were really determined to disrupt the march.
Oh, absolutely. They were using, sit-in blockades and things like that.
Exactly. They brought Friedrichstrasse, which is, one of Berlin's main arteries, basically to a standstill.
Wow. I mean, that's a pretty powerful image, right?
Yeah.
You can almost feel the tension just thinking about those two groups facing off, not just a war of words, but like a battle for space, for visibility.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting, right? Because Germany's constitution, which was, let's be honest, born out of the ashes of its past,
Right.
it fiercely protects freedom of assembly. And that means that even groups with ideologies that most of us would find hateful, they still have a right to march.
Right.
But, and here's the catch, it also prohibits incitement to violence.
Which can be a pretty blurry line sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I mean, where does that leave the police? They're stuck in the middle, right?
Oh, they're walking a tightrope, that's for sure.
Trying to, uphold the law, protect everyone's rights, and also just prevent things from completely spiraling out of control.
Yeah, and it's not an easy job. They go through a pretty extensive training, actually. A lot of it focuses on, de-escalation tactics, understanding crowd psychology, and just kind of navigating the legal complexities of, protests and counter-protests.
Right, because it's not just about keeping the peace. It's about, understanding the nuances of the law, right?
Exactly. And they're also trained to spot potential triggers for violence, and intervene quickly if they need to.
I mean, it sounds like they need to be, part lawyer, part psychologist, part, martial arts expert.
Yeah, pretty much.
All at the same time.
But no amount of training can really fully prepare you for the raw emotion, the kind of, the potential for volatility that you see in the situations.
It's got to be incredibly intense. So this wasn't an isolated incident, was it? We've seen this kind of thing play out before, haven't we?
Yeah, unfortunately not. Just back in December, the same neo-Nazi group actually held a march. And again, it was met with massive counter-protests. And then there was that incident in southern Berlin, remember? After a neo-Nazi march there, a group of them actually attacked people who were heading to a counter-demonstration.
I remember that. It was really disturbing.
Yeah. And the thing is, it was mostly young men and even teenagers involved in the attack.
That's what really gets to me.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, what is it that's attracting these young people to such extreme ideologies? What's going on there?
Yeah, it's a question that haunts a lot of people, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, some people argue that, the best course of action is to just ignore these groups, right? Like, don't give them any attention, any publicity.
The old oxygen of publicity argument.
Exactly. But then others say, well, no, silence equals complicity. You have to actively confront these ideologies, challenge them, expose them.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Where do you draw the line?
It really is. So why Berlin, though? What is it about this city that makes it such a lightning rod for these kinds of clashes?
Well, Berlin is, it's a city that really carries its history with it, both the good and the bad, the triumphs and the darkest chapters. The legacy of Nazism, it's like an open wound, isn't it? A constant reminder of, of how fragile democracy can be and the dangers of unchecked hate.
It's almost like, those the historical echoes are still reverberating, through the streets of Berlin today.
Yeah, and you have to remember, Berlin also attracts people from all over the world, right? It's a melting pot, a real mix of cultures and ideologies.
Which I guess can create friction.
Sometimes, yeah.
So we've got this, we've got the historical backdrop, we've got this incredibly diverse population, and then we've got this legal framework that, guarantees freedom of speech, but at the same time, it's also wrestling with the boundaries of that freedom.
Right. And that's a balancing act, isn't it?
It's like a powder keg just, waiting for a spark.
And unfortunately, there seem to be a lot of sparks flying around these days.
Yeah. The rise of these far-right movements that we're seeing across Europe, I mean, it's pretty alarming, isn't it?
It is. And a lot of it is fueled by, economic anxiety, anti-immigrant sentiment, the kind of things that can really, really get people riled up.
And it's a reminder, isn't it, that, the demons of the past, they haven't been completely banished. They can come back to haunt us in new and unexpected ways.
And that brings us back to the question, doesn't it? Are these events in Berlin, are they a kind of, a canary in the coal mine? Are we seeing a global shift toward intolerance? Or can we somehow find a way to bridge these divides and build a more tolerant, a more understanding future?
It's a big question. It's
Yeah,
a question that, deserves a lot more thought, a lot more discussion.
absolutely. It's a complex issue. No easy answers, that's for sure.
Well, on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive, folks. It's been a thought-provoking one, to say the least.
It has.
And we'll see you next time for a deep dive into whatever's making headlines, whatever's making us think. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, keep those conversations going.
And keep an open mind.
Couldn't have said it better myself. See you all soon.